So we have some more Factorio Wave Defense speedrunning to do. I wanted to do for a while a second video that talked a bit more about like the specifics of what was happening and why the base was doing what it was doing, and yeah, the various ways that the parts fit together. This run, I mean, you've seen the title. It ends up faster, but I almost abandoned this run at like 3 or 4 different places because I wasn't really happy with it, and then realized afterwards that this is actually a good time to talk about how it should work, because we've got an example of the thing not working, and so not only can we say this is what should happen, we can go, okay, this is what it looks like and why it's suboptimal when it doesn't. So pretty much the same plan as last time. Deciding where my power grid is going to go, putting down the burner miners on the coal. Wave defense things. I think this here might be the only time that personal robots with worker robot speed 3 have ever copy-pasted a blueprint of a loop of burner miners on coal, but sure, wave defense things. Setting up the stone. I mean, there might be a better order to do all of this stuff in, but I'm still kind of fine with that because part of it is just waiting for the burner miners to have mined enough coal so that I can take it over to the power plant, and that will be self-sufficient for a bit of a while. Bunch of trees to clean out. We're going to need a lot of power poles anyway, so that's fine. Doing the iron thing. Yeah, these still won't work, but it's okay. I'm kind of okay with this part of the plan. Yeah, and I also haven't, there's map re-rolling at the beginning, and I mean, this isn't a category yet, but I'm kind of approaching this wave defense with a similar kind of rule set in mind as the default settings, where you get to see the map preview, and then the time of the run is from when you see the seed to deciding to when you launch a rocket, because there's often, and for me there's a little bit of planning time in there of where is my build going, where is my first power plant going, because wave defense things, and you get given all the underground pipes, I have a little more freedom than you would usually have about where I put that thing, so I can drag it down by the coal. I suspect in a lot of cases having the coal this far away from the lake would be highly suboptimal, because when you don't start with all those resources, that's a more difficult thing to do. For me, I care more about whether the starting patches are closer together, and yeah, I think this was one of the bits of the run where I was like, I need to get the substation in the right place. The substation is in a sufficiently important place in the middle of these smelter lanes that if I get this in the wrong place, then yeah, it's a mess. And then I get those in the wrong place too. Yeah, building furnace lines powered by substations is still a weird thing. Yeah, and then those are in the wrong place. But yeah, may as well. And then that power pole was almost in the way of where the coal feed is going to go. Yeah, so the things I look for in a map seed and why I roll past a lot of them. I know that this base is going to end up with 2 lanes of iron and 2 lanes of copper. Air quotes, 2 lanes for people who have not seen this build before. It doesn't. Yeah, it's interesting. Wave defense things. But I know the copper, the petrochemical stuff is going to be on the inside of the copper smelting for reasons which we'll see soon. and I want that to be near the lake for two reasons. Number one, the advanced oil processing needs water, and that being near the lake is helpful. And two, a big part of the power generation in the late game comes from solid fuel, and so putting the big power plant near the petrochemical, near the lake, is just a good plan. So the iron goes on the outside, and by outside I mean sort of on the wall side of the base, and the copper goes on sort of the inside or the lake side of the base. And so because of that, I look for seeds that have that are closer to having the iron on the outside nearer the wall and the copper closer to the middle. And then the starting patch is kind of close together, and accessible oil. Those are the things that I care about. Doing the mixed belts thing. This is probably weird if you've seen Factorio but haven't seen Wave Defense. The idea of mixed steel furnaces and stone furnaces, kind of funny, especially powered by substations. But Wave Defense gives us these things, we will use them. So the previewing it is an interesting thing. It's fairly common across Factorio players generally, because for a couple of reasons. But when you first install the game, when you click on preview for the first time, it gives you a little warning of do you really want to do this? This might spoil the map. Part of the excitement is not knowing where you are and trying to figure out how to survive there and build all the things you need. And that's interesting. I think that, one of the most interesting runs I had was a blind Death World run, and you don't do that quickly because you don't know where any of the stuff is. Most of the time, definitely when you're planning a speed run, you want to know where all the stuff is, which way you have to go for things. When you're doing pretty much any other Factorio run, you're interested in, can I get to the resources that I'll need? Is there oil in a decent place? Is there, if you're thinking of doing a nuclear fuel thing, is there any uranium at all? Is there, is it a seed that's playable? On Death World, you can also look at, are there just prohibitively close bases? Am I going to run into major issues in the first 10 minutes with bases I can't clear? Previewing is pretty common. I think even this miners into power plant thing was a thing that I've considered rearranging at this point, because you can see from all the coal in my inventory, I could just put all that coal in the power plant and have it manually fed a bit more, and use the miners I have on things like iron that will make the base bigger and faster. But this is still doing fairly normal things. One of the concerns about oil is how much you get and where it is. You can get oil spawning inside the perimeter, and that can be fine, although you might struggle to have enough. The split is cool. I think I said last time that I would talk about that splitter, and then didn't, but we'll probably will, because we won't be rushing through explaining everything else at this point. But get all the things fueled, they'll be happier. Get the other intermediates, need to make a lot more inserters and a lot more mining drills. Previewing all stuff. Whereas if there's oil further away, you can be extremely confident for Wave Defense that will be enough oil for what you need. But depending on where it is, it can be tricky and annoying to defend. Not so much the oil outpost itself, but the pipe. The pipe ends up being the thing about whether or not I'm happy with any particular oil deposit for a Wave Defense run. yeah, because the way the biters attack on this map, in this scenario, they prioritize the silo more than, like, there isn't, like, the map doesn't do pollution. Oh yeah, this is one of the bits where I realized that I was not doing this well. Like, why am I setting up steel now? Like, that is, for people who haven't seen the Wave Defense before, that's my entire steel build. But like, why am I doing this now? I don't think I even have ore running down that lane. But I also don't have circuits up. I'm not even mining copper. I haven't automated any of the infrastructure more. Why, like, and this run isn't short on steel. Why am I spending my time putting the steel line down? That was one of the things that I looked at when I was running this and thought, like, why is this does not seem like it will work out. But anyway, there'll be more of those moments as well. Yeah, so the way the biters path, they path in towards the central thing, which means if they'll come sort of diagonally in at the corners and directly out from the walls, they'll also come directly in. But if you're on like a flat part of the wall at like that's halfway between the center of the wall, each edge and the corner, if you're at like 10-30 on a compass map, the biters will still be coming in diagonally, which means, oh yeah, I also wasn't sure if one inserter would work there, but we'll try it for a bit. I think I end up changing it later as well. Never mind. If you build a straight pipe that goes from your outpost directly back to where your wall is on Wave Defense, you can have biters pathing diagonally into the pipe and missing the outpost, and so you need to do a bit more defense for the pipe, which is kind of weird and annoying as well. Oh yeah, this is yet another moment where I'm thinking, like, what am I even doing this run? I am lacking focus. Why do I need wall at the moment? Do I need to start wall? I'm like pretty much never short of wall, and I haven't even set up copper mining yet. So what? Yeah. Counting how many miners I've got, deciding I need more miners. I think this also ends up being funny later. But yeah, my prioritizing is a bit all over the place this run. So yes, oil outposts. If you can find an outpost within a wall, that's fine. If you can find, but it might not be enough. If you can find an oil outpost that's outside the wall but kind of close, that's nice. The big thing that I find end up being important is, do you need to do a diagonal pipe from the oil outpost to wherever your oil processing is going to be, or can you just do a straight pipe? Because straight pipes are easier to do faster. You can just get in a car and drag the pipe behind you, and that's nice and fast. Trying to set up the substations on the other side without having done the smelting lane. So it's just like put the smelting lane in. That's going to be the easier way of doing the thing. Oh well. And it doesn't even matter, because do I even have miners on copper at the moment? Like, I don't even have ore approaching where the smelting lane will be yet. There's like better ways for me to be doing this. And I think I half realized that when I was setting up the steel, because I didn't even give them boxes yet, because so steel will spend a lot more time caching inside a smelter than the other kinds of ore. Oh yeah, this is the other part that I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I setting up the mall and the green chip build when I don't even have miners on copper yet? This is just like, this was one of the other parts that I looked at and thought, like, this is the wrong way to be doing things. I am all over the place today. What's going on? Because yeah, it's not that I don't even have copper plates rolling down that belt to be turned into chips yet. It's that I'm not even mining the ore that will be, and then I go to connect the thing and realize, no, I haven't put the other substation in them all. That's why it's not connecting yet. So, okay. Go and do some of these things that you haven't done yet. It's kind of important. Turns out, copper is kind of a big deal if you want to be able to build things that use copper. So yeah. Yes, I was talking about the waste steel caches. So there are a bunch of different inbuilt caching rules for when assemblers will work and when inserters will give machines things to process, and it's different for fluids, and there's a bunch of stuff like that. One of the first ones you encounter is that smelters will just smelt everything until they're full. Assemblers will kind of stop if they don't have anywhere to put it, and won't build up too much of an internal buffer, whereas smelters will, all of the furnaces will quite happily just completely fill all of their stacks to capacity. I think there's a couple of times you can see me running down the lanes picking stuff out of the furnaces. The steel will take even longer to fill up its internal buffer because it processes slower, and because you need to spend 5 iron plates to get even 1 steel plate. But steel plates and iron plates both stack to 100, so a stack of steel in a furnace represents 500 pieces of iron ore. And so one of the other quirks about Death Worlds in particular is that if you're buffering more steel than you realize you need, that can be quite a source of pollution that you're generating as pollution. Yes, and this belt thing is like that. That's an awful way to do that. What am I doing? There must be better ways to do this. Never mind. Does not feel like a clean run. We are persisting. That in Death World and in almost other normal Factorio circumstances except Wave Defense, and if you turn off pollution, the rate at which the biters get stronger is determined by the amount of pollution you put on your map, and that's from all sources, from vehicles, although it's not particularly big, from mining, which is a very large component, and usually not so much here because we're doing all our mining inside our perimeter, but often in normal Factorio where you have to expand to get new mining patches, the mining will happen closer to your frontiers, closer to biters. So that's actually not related to Evo, that's related to pollution spreading across the map and generating attacks, which is a different thing, but miners are a major source of pollution. The boilers are also solid fuel-based power is a big thing that generates pollution, but also just processing stuff. And so if you're putting a large amount of steel in a furnace and not doing anything with it, or if you're manufacturing a large number of things like reasonably intensive things like red chips and filling a bus with them on a Death World, all of those things represent pollution that you have put on the map and given to the biters that upgrade the biters, but are giving you no marginal value for your base because they're just sitting there waiting to have something done with them. So for Death Worlds, and generally, but it doesn't matter so much generally because they're not so tightly balanced. For Death Worlds, there's a good argument that you want to be undersupplying your entire base. So usually full chests and full belts and a full bus, even though we've not talked about buses because this is a speedrun and buses aren't fast, are a sign of a happy base and a wealthy player and all that kind of stuff. This full coal belt says, I have all the coal that I need, yay for me. In Death World, less so much with coal but with other more expensive resources, it means I've put a lot of pollution on the map that I'm not actually leveraging yet, which can be a bad thing. And and in speedruns can mean I've not balanced out my bottlenecks appropriately. Like I'm putting a lot of effort to putting things on belts that I'm not actually using. Maybe I should be balancing those things better. So yeah, you want to see all the belts flowing and all the materials going through the stuff. These belts are flowing, so I'm reasonably happy with this. But it's still talking about this speedrun in particular again. It's day 4. I'm not really anywhere near going out and doing the first major push, but it's kind of important. I kind of want to get that done like as close to day 4 as possible. I think most of them end up being day 5 because there's just a bunch of stuff to do, and I think that'll be interesting if I get into Wave Defense hard, because I suspect the attacks on that mode will escalate to a point where I need to do something about it, like even earlier, which means I won't be able to set this much infrastructure up before going and doing the first push. But yeah, so we've got some more copper now. Power plant is happy for the moment. I've got so much wall that I'm not doing anything with. That was pretty, making the refineries is the only thing I need for the stone, so they can all go back there. I'm still not sure I'm pretty sure I have enough furnaces at this point, so get rid of that miner. But yeah, I think the grenades that just disappeared at the bottom of the screen are the only places that I use the tier 1 assemblers, because those are bottlenecked by the rate at which the miners give coal to the assemblers rather than the assembler speed. And I'm not in a huge hurry for those. I can, I've set those up, I can come back before I go in and push and be fine. But yeah, counting those miners, I think there was 35, I need a bunch more. Don't want it to overlap with the coal, so they can go there. That's fine. This is still day 4, but it's getting towards the night time of day 4. But yeah, this is pretty normal. That's a trick that I like. I get 2 belts of copper. If I have done the combat shotgun, but I've not arranged the combat hotbar yet. Yeah, so these are the full belts I was like, I guess we can say, complaining about, but I have immediately a plan to do stuff with these, so. But yeah, it's still to turn all these things into green chips. Oh yeah, and this is also the point where I realized that I don't actually have all the assembly machines I needed for this part of the build. That was an important thing as well, and even when I upgrade some of these, which is also part of the plan, I don't have enough for the rest of the build, so that's a good time. Oh yeah, this particular inserter just here was a thing, that one right there is a thing I was going to talk about, and then I don't think I did. So the deal with that one is that 2 blue assemblers, actually 4 blue assemblers making chips won't fill half a yellow belt, but 2 assemblers making blue chips and 2 tier 3 green assemblers will make more than half a belt of green chips, which means I would end up like bottlenecked by the size of the belt. And so that other inserter, and yeah, we swap all of the green chips. I don't know if I'm going to see it again if we go past it. Swapping all the chips to the inside, and then, oh yeah, there's another bit of like, even that's not in the right place. Like I can't even put an underground belt and a buffer in the right place on this run. Oh well. And then yeah, haven't crafted the boxes I need to actually make the buffer. Good times. Yeah, so that extra inserter coming out the bottom of the green assembler puts some of the green chips on the other side of the belt. And all of that together means I get close to a full belt of green chips going into the buffer. And it prioritizes them all first, but the stuff we set up in them all for the power plant and the pipes, none of that uses green chips. So all of this is like somewhat carefully arranged to have, about a belt and a half. So a full belt of green chips will take a belt and a half of copper, and I'm doing almost that. Which means the copper on the right, which is kind of behind the menu at the moment, that's getting buffered, is like a little bit over half a belt, or at least will be soon. I'm not actually smelting that much copper at the moment because that line is only 19 stone furnaces long, which is, questionable. Are we about to? Yeah. So this is one of the weird Wave Defense specific things that I quite like because it's a bit silly. And that's for later. But at this point swaps me from 2 full lanes of iron, which I need to build all the infrastructure, to 2 full lanes of copper, which is important because we need more copper than iron to make the rocket, because we need a lot of green chips. So I have about a full belt of green chips casing, which takes about a full belt and a half of copper. The things I set up in the flex mall before doing the push don't take any green chips. They just take iron, and so I need to make sure that the extra inserter is at the bottom of the green assembler. Do we see it again? Maybe. Yeah, there's this extra weird inserter at the bottom of the lower tier 3 green chips assembler that just gets around the yellow belt bottleneck. So that's a trick. And then setting up all the stuff that does not need green chips. I made some pipes earlier. These guys can have some pipes. They need a lot of pipes. That build is probably constrained by the rate at which the middle assembler is making pipe, but it's also fine because I've got the time to do that, and I gave it some more pipe that I made earlier. It's also why I'm not particularly concerned about over making pipe earlier. But checking I've done all the things I need, doing a bit of repairs. One of the things I'm not really looking at when I'm previewing maps, although arguably I could if I was going to be taking it that seriously, is like where the bases are and what I'll have to worry about. Like I'm pretty happy that with Wave Defense you're going to have to be defending anyway, but for geometry reasons the corners are almost always a weak point. Just because there are like more angles that biters can arrive and attack your gun turrets and have fewer gun turrets like contributing to the fight and all that kind of stuff. It's very similar to the concept in serious StarCraft of the idea of like the concave of your units. On the corners you've got like those two on the edge, and then there's 3/4 of a circle where you can get surrounded, and then that's on the corners, and then on the edge there's only like you've got more support from gun turrets nearby. But so that's also why we go to the corner bases first to clear them out, and also why I tend to push bases closer to the corners more than I will bother pushing bases that are kind of in the middle of the walls, although still going to push a bunch of these, let the turrets do that, that'll be fine. Realize I don't actually have enough ammo to do that. So I think one of the other things I wanted to mention briefly was the way the combat upgrades work in Wave Defense, because we're getting all these, each of the bonuses you get in Wave Defense, the costs increase by 250 each time, but the advantage you get from each bonus is always 10%. So at the moment I'm like level 5 damage, level 4 speed. That's just a straight 50% damage, 40% of speed, although I think I mentioned the thing before about the turrets getting that bonus twice. It applies once to my shotgun because it applies to the ammo, but the gun turrets get that bonus as well. So they'll be doing whatever 1.6 squared is. Is that 250? 256 probably? Powers of 2, things I should know. So with damage 6, my shotgun will be doing, ignoring the firing speed, my shotgun will be doing 1.6 times as much damage, and the gun turrets will be doing 256% of the damage they would with no upgrades, which is cool. The difference between this and the base game where you research the upgrades is the marginal effect of the researched upgrades are not even. Like the first 2 ranks are 10%, and then the 3rd and 4th and I think 5th rank of firing speed and damage bonus upgrades that you research are 20%. So the first 2 levels match between the base game and Wave Defense. Then you need to get to level 4 on Wave Defense before that's equivalent to the 3rd research defense doing. Yeah, I think this was one of the other parts where I was questioning my focus while running this, because I ended up with like prioritizing weapon speed more than damage, because we talked about how the gun turrets get the damage upgrade twice. I much prefer having more damage upgrades than more speed upgrades, especially compared to armor, which everything important has, and found myself in the situation of having too many, more speed upgrades than I wanted, and not being happy with that, but continuing. In terms of pacing of damage upgrades in regular games, there's actually an interesting point about that as well, which we might get into a bit. Damage upgrades 1 and 2 are pretty standard, although speed runs, you often don't bother with anything more than damage 1, and that's even if you're expecting combat, and even then turrets are not a big part of speedrun combat usually. There's a lot of grenades. Once you get the technology and the resources for landmines, there's a lot of landmines. We don't have that yet. It requires all processing. Later on in the game, in sort of normal Factorio, there's the laser spiders and artillery and nuclear weapons and flamethrowers and a bunch of well-established ways of doing things. The turrets are kind of this awkward middle ground that don't particularly get good until they've got a lot of upgrades, and the marginal benefit you get normally is not huge. There are upgrades that you can get that I think it's damage upgrade 6, which requires everything not including space exchange. It doesn't require purple science either. It's up to yellow science. It's the first gun upgrade is red science, the second is red and green, the 3rd and 4th are red, green and military science, the 5th also includes blue science, which is the next tier after that, and also gives you 20%, and then the 6th one gives you 40% and also requires yellow science. And that's there are almost no speedrun conditions where you're going to one rocket where that makes any kind of sense. If you're looking at the minimap for where the oil is and then not paying attention to where the trees are, while you're dragging power out to the oil. That's also fun. Probably also pretty Factorio. There are not many circumstances in a game where you're playing to one rocket where getting damage 6 makes a whole lot of sense. It's a big resource investment for a thing that doesn't give you a whole lot of value. But in this scenario, it's just killing more nests, which is a thing we're going to do anyway. And here's me deciding that some of these other pump jacks were better placed because I can use fewer pipes. So the research damage 6 from the main game takes you up to in total 120% worth of bonus, which for us is the equivalent of rank 12, which I don't always get that far. I don't often need to. But if you have enough turrets and you're not concerned about facing huge waves of the things, and especially as the gun turrets get that bonus twice, rank 12, 120% damage upgrades from your rank 6 researched damage, or in my case 12 levels of Wave Defense upgrades is like, it'll do okay against even the behemoth biters, which I don't think we've seen, and we probably don't, because I just plan on getting done before that. They'll still take a while to go down, but it'll do a thing. And yeah, again, me realizing I didn't actually have quite enough ammunition to fully stock those turrets as much as I would have liked, but hey. Do I? Yeah, so this is... Yeah, I don't even remember if I put more guns and more walls on the bottom part. I don't think I do. I think I just leave it there. But you can see I've got like a bit more wall on the south end of that thing, because that's the side that will be exposed to where like biters arriving towards the net. The biters pathing towards the silo in the middle are a lot more likely to hit the bottom of that oil outpost than they are to arrive on the pipe like going down, because at that point you're going kind of orthogonal to the silo. So yeah, realizing I didn't have all the underground pipes I needed, take all the resources, but like don't produce too many more of them. The steam engines are done, but I don't need them yet. And yeah, so one of the other big sources of frustration when you're playing this normally is threading these pipes through forests. Whereas in Wave Defense and other situations where you've already got bots, you can do the copy and paste things like this, and if there are trees in the way, the bots will just take care of it. If there are trees in the way normally and you're doing the dragging thing, then one of the pipes will fail to place, and then you won't be dragging pipes anymore, and you'll shoot off into the distance without bringing the oil pipe with you, and you have to turn around, and that'll be a mess. But yeah, bots make things easy. Bots are also, via the research game, things you don't get until after you've done all of your oil processing. Like they're a thing that happens. Yeah, the general narrative is you need oil in order to do red chips, which are one of the components for the blue science, the chemical science, which then allows you to unlock the advanced oil processing, which then allows you to get the other petrochemical products you need to be able to build the electric engines that you need for bots. And yeah, there's a bunch of other research in there as well, but this is like, it's not entirely uncommon for people to mod bots into their starting game if they feel like it. Like, not applicable for speedruns, but just because, yeah, skipping the manual phase is easier. And yeah, this bit here is why the splitter I said is quite important. And I haven't seen this done a lot, but actually this connects to one of the other parts I was going to talk about like the pacing of the rest of the base. So the splitter that I said was important at the top of the copper smelter needs to be a splitter, because if I do an inserter like I have with the other lanes, the inserter, even a fast inserter, won't keep up with the rate at which those 6 chemical plants making plastic will also be taking coal off that belt. A more common way to do this is just have a separate line of coal going into your factory, just like bypassing the smelter block entirely. And usually, like, there are other resources you need as well for other kinds of research that we're not doing. Like, you need stone, both stone and stone bricks normally, and I don't, because I'm not doing research, I'm not making anything that uses those. So there's often like a bit more smelting, and also steel basically never looks like that. The steel build I have is weird. But yeah, one of the consequences of this is, because of the ratios of the rates of which things are being produced without, asterisk brackets, without modules, each piece of coal gives you 2 pieces of plastic. And so I'm putting at most half a belt of coal into this, and slightly less than that because I've got to fuel all the smelters there as well, which means I'm getting out a bit less than half a lane of plastic, which is interesting, because that throttles, like, that's a bound on now my entire base of like all the things I can make. That gives me a limit on what I can manufacture at what rates, because I've got, I'm producing plastic at less than a full belt's rate. We got a couple of speedrun tricks to get around that. The main trick is like the idea of the buffer. And yeah, I think I did go back because I realized I didn't have enough things. Other things I'm not happy about with the speedrun. And the idea of a buffer is, even if I'm not using a full lane of plastic, if I can be producing all that I can, then I can end up using more than, I can use the surplus that I have at any particular point to fill a buffer, and then later when I want to use more than a full belt, I can empty the buffer into the build. And if I've set it up, like, the particular way I set it up means that I can get more than 1 belt of output from the thing and the buffer towards the end of the run when I want a lot of stuff. So it's pretty common. I think a lot of the other speed runs will buffer from the chem plant into a box and then onto a belt, and then they'll have a cache of plastic directly outside of the chem plant, and I will talk about why I don't do that in a moment, because I think I've got to talk about a different thing very soon. The solid fuel is also a thing that we buffer. Actually, the solid fuel buffer is going to be a major thing to talk about in this run in particular. And again, we're making sure we can fill up both sides of a belt. I don't really worry about lane biasing that, because the buffer will sort that out. Just here, the way I splitter these before the buffer, and notice the splitter just there with the chemical fuel before the buffer doesn't have a priority on it. That's a fairly serious mistake, which is a thing we will circle back to in a moment. So at the moment, both of those splitters before the buffer are just putting things evenly in both directions. Let's talk about the plastic one. That's the plastic one. The thing I will use the plastic for before the buffer doesn't use that much plastic. It's just the low density structure. It uses a bit of plastic, but not all that much, and it's quite a slow build. And so yeah, there will always be plastic flowing through the other side into the buffer, and that buffer will fill up, and I'm not doing anything with it at the moment, and I also haven't built the low density structure, so that's just all plastic that I'm just banking and will use later. And also the way it's set up means that the LDS will always be full of plastic, and then the belt going through the buffer will be like, it will have less on it, but when I start to draw from the buffer, when I build the final form of the giant machine, I will be able to have a full belt coming out of the buffer, and also the stuff that the LDS build needs separately, which is in total will end up more than one yellow belt of plastic output, even though I've got less than a full belt of production, and also only one yellow belt coming out of that production, and then the buffer just handles everything else. So yeah, making the rest of the LDS now. I think people may have seen this before, and yeah, you can see the buffer just putting things on both sides, and that's fine. I think sometimes I need to manually balance that a bit later, but there's another interesting point to mention about how these buffers work, that is not necessarily standard, but actually kind of central to one of the things I'm going to complain about me having done badly in this run later, in that all those inserters just put things in the chests, and then but as they're built, there's no way to get the stuff out of the chest again. I end up coming back and turning all the inserters around and basically flipping each buffer from cache to dump, and that means I can control when that happens, which for one of these buffers is actually super important. There's like other ways of building these buffers that will just receive a belt of stuff and have like one or two belts of output, and then just automatically yes, we need to talk about this. So notice that the splitter that's splitting between the rocket fuel and the buffer heading towards the right for the power plant, it's like splitting it evenly in both directions. That's an important point to realize, and we'll talk about that after I've talked about these buffers again. Yeah, so I have to manually come back and flip those buffers. You can have things that will just automatically cache if there's a surplus or if there's not much draw, and then also automatically refill if there is that much, if there is draw, if I am trying to use the things coming out. Those, yeah, I think and like that design of buffer does get used in speedruns by speedrunners better than me. But we should probably talk. Yeah, let's talk about that solid fuel buffer that's now way off screen to the right. And so that is the one where I specifically do not want to be emptying the buffer until I explicitly choose to. And the reason for that is like pretty fun. This is not a base that can sustain itself for much after it launches a rocket. Like, this entire thing is designed to put up one rocket, do that as quickly as possible, not care about what happens after that, because the speedrun goes to the first rocket. So like the defensive plans probably are no good for longer than that. Like they scale into being able to deal with the size of biters I have, but don't really scale much beyond that. Yeah, here's me being unhappy again about not having the assemblers to build the thing that I actually kind of need to build, because this entire setup is on a timer of, like, I think it's 40 minutes between when I get that down and when I have the low density structure and rocket fuel that I need to be able to do a thing. And that mostly seems to be okay. I've got like enough other stuff to do in that time that doesn't seem to be the bottleneck. But yes, let's talk about the base dyeing quickly. So the solid fuel that I'm making from the light oil ends up being the primary fuel source after coal. It has the little coal power plant there which does the thing. Is this, I think, yeah, this is a bit of a mess as well, isn't it? I realize I put that in the wrong place and the plastic's in the wrong place, and so okay, let's just reverse this entire thing, it'll be fine. Let's do it like that, that'll work, sure. So yeah, the main power source ends up being the solid fuel made from the light oil. And I think I had like 10 or, no, I think it's 11. 10 or 11, you know, whatever. That many chem plants making solid fuel from light oil. Actually, let's first talk about the difference between petrochem builds in sort of, you know, normal things and speedrun things. In a normal game, what's pretty common is you'll set up, like, there are ways to set up circuit conditions and tests and things to say, okay, if this tank is more than 80% full, push the overflow into this other system. And if this tank is like less than 20% full, like, don't activate this pump, keep all the fluid in this system. And so using stuff like that, you can build systems, you know, you can arrange your petrochemical stuff to make sure that you've always got enough of each kind of output to work with, and only convert the heavy oil to light oil if you've got too much heavy oil, and only convert the light oil to petrogas. Yeah, I forget the name of it, whatever. Only do those conversions if you have more than you need of the heavier type and sort of are running out of the lower type. That takes a bit of a while to set up, so the speedrun thing is you do some math to figure out basically what the rates of your refineries and your chem plants that are using the various products and your cracking that converts one product to the next. You do a bunch of math to figure out what those rates are and what kind of resources you'll need, what scale you're planning on building, and then figure out how many buildings you need, and don't bother setting up any circuit conditions, just like have things automatically do things. And if you're not careful about the math, then you can run into situations where the entire thing stops because one of your tanks is full and there's no space for the refineries to push out more products. Like if your system is full of heavy oil, your advanced oil processing just straight up won't run until there is space in the pipe system to put the heavy oil, which means your entire build will be throttled back to the rate at which you are processing heavy oil. And conversely, if you for example overbuild the cracking of your light oil into gas, then you can run into situations where you've got too much gas, but you're not really using enough of it at a substantial rate, which slows down all your refining, which means you don't get as much light oil, but you're still trying to crack all of that light oil into gas, which also doesn't work, and the entire thing could just kind of slow down, and light oil ends up being pretty important. So the way around that, the common way around that, is just to overbuild everything and then use like the circuit tests to check whether or not I've got a surplus of light oil, and if so, push it into the cracking, and that way make sure everything works. So yeah, the kind of speedrunny way is I'm not going to spend time in-game building the circuit conditions and like figuring out how to put tanks in, because you can't just put circuits anyway. You've got to have things that you're testing, and the things you need to test are the volumes of tanks. So you've got to figure out where to put tanks in your build. I only put one tank in the products build, because I know that that particular arrangement of refineries and light oil and gas and all that kind of stuff is slightly light oil high. Like, I'm using all of the products that I'm getting out, but I'm using the gas at a slightly lower rate overall relative to what I'm making than the light oil. So the light oil will build up a little bit, and that extra tank there just to make sure everything runs nice and fast. But those ratios are all based on, like, when I said I was only ever getting like a full belt of plastic out, well, like at a bit less than a full belt, because I'm limited by the half belt of coal that I'm sort of running down the side of the copper smelting with that first splitter. So that means I know how much gas I'm using. I also can figure out, if I decide how many solid fuel chem plants I want, that gives me a baseline of how much gas do I need, how much light oil do I need, and then I can figure out how many refineries I want and what sort of cracking to have that roughly balanced without any circuit conditions. And so I know I'm going like a bit less than a belt of plastic, which tells me how much gas I need. The light oil thing is where we circle back to the idea of the base not being able to sustain itself for much more than a rocket, and me wanting to manually control the buffers. So the base, even kind of up to this point, until I get the full mixed build online, and in particular the rocket control unit, because beacons are terrible for power usage. They're like great overall, but terrible for power usage. The base will more or less sustain itself on the first power plant just based on coal, which has like 20 boilers and 40 steam engines. Like that about balances, which is what I want. And at that point, I want to be doing that all with coal and not using the solid fuel, even though I'm making the solid fuel. I very much want to be buffering solid fuel. And then, it turns out that power plant isn't actually working great. The last couple, like, I'm not mining enough coal there, and that's a problem. This is me realizing, oh yeah, why am I low on power? I'm just not, like, I'm not mining enough coal. I'm not pushing enough coal into this thing to actually keep up with the power grid demands that I need. So I realize I need to do something about that. I think this is maybe the third or fourth point that I'm wondering whether or not this is a run I want to continue with, and then deciding actually, what I should probably do is like put miners on the coal before going and sorting out the new power plant for like the same reasons we want to get to. I want to be using all of this coal, and at this point, not any of the solid fuel. And the reason for that is all of the solid fuel I want to put in the buffer and not use, because I don't actually make enough solid fuel or mine enough coal at the end of the game to sustainably support the size of base that I actually build. Like, all the solid fuel that's going into the buffer now is what I will be drawing on later to power the base. And the way power grids work in Factorio is, I have some stuff just to do. Browning out is very common. There's a spiral where, like, you're low on power, everything slows down, your miners slow down, which means you mine less coal, which means your power grid gets less coal, which means your power grid suffers even more, which means your miners suffer even more, and you spiral into doom. So that was the reason for that little manual top up there. Building this power grid, I specifically want to be running the coal one for as long as I can and not using the solid fuel. The way that multiple steam engines work in Factorio is, if they're all on the same grid, they will just share the load up to the rate at which your power grid needs it. which means if I've got a base that more or less fits within the footprint of the coal-fed power plant, and this base mostly does. I mean, that wasn't necessarily by design. That was just kind of like that. The base I built happened to be about 20 boilers big, and then that turned into the design. But yeah, do I actually connect? I think I figure I need to out of desperation. But if I connect the solid fuel power plant too early, then when I don't need it and I'm not fully using it, the base will naturally split the power load across all of the steam engines that I've got. Like some of them will be coal, some of them will be solid fuel fed, and then I will end up using a mixture of solid fuel and coal when the base could be powered at that point entirely by the coal. And the downside of this is I start using the solid fuel earlier, and the problem there is I'm not actually making enough solid fuel to support my base. Like I want to be buffering it at that point, so that when the base gets huge after I put up the rest of the mixed build, the solid fuel is going through the buffer, and the buffer's not taking the solid fuel, but I'm now sort of running a bit of that into the power plant, and that, again, this is a run I wasn't super happy with, and yeah, more to say about that at a bit. So if I start leaning on the solid fuel too early, then I don't have enough of a reserve of solid fuel later when I really get the power usage up, and the entire base can die by running out of power by not having enough solid fuel, and I don't actually make enough solid fuel to support itself because I'm leaning on filling the buffer before I need it. And so that's why this is a case where I specifically want to be able to control when the buffer goes from fill the buffer to empty the buffer, because if I just connect it to the power plant and let it go normally, then the buffer will empty when I could just be using the coal, and then when I need to use the solid fuel I won't have enough solid fuel, and then the run will die because I will not have as much power as I need and things will be terrible. So yeah, other options include not connecting the solid fuel line to the power grid, but like the speedrun concern with all of these, especially as I only have the personal robots and I'm not manufacturing my own robots, is I have to visit these myself to change all of these configurations. If I had roboport coverage, if I had bots in the base rather than just on my mobile armor suit, I could have the bots reverse that buffer for me from wherever. Like other things I've considered are putting a single roboport next to the solid fuel buffer just to be able to connect it to the power grid from wherever I am, except that like I still need to manually visit my other buffers as well, because all those buffer designs are like there's this kind of half-assed, oh yeah, just fill it, I'll visit it later and turn it on again, and they seem to be working well enough for now. Because the thing is, I don't have that many buffers because I don't need that many resources, because I'm only launching a rocket. Like, I'm not doing all of the research. The bigger, more serious speedruns that buffer huge amounts of stuff, they can't really afford the time to visit all the different places where they're buffering stuff. So they design buffers that will naturally fill and then naturally empty it without them having to do anything about it, because they don't want to go all the way back there because they got other stuff to do. The other nature of this thing is because I've got a slow rocket fuel and low density structure build, because it's taking the next 40 minutes while I've got to do these other things, those are things I don't have to do, while normal speedruns will have to set up bigger versions of those, which also helps the power grid. Like, it means I have a smaller base that's chugging along for longer, which means my base doesn't have to peak at such an extreme way, which means my base can be smaller, my power grid can be smaller, all of that stuff can be a little more concise. Yeah, and the other reason why I'm kind of happy manually flipping these buffers is because I have to come back to all these places anyway. Like, I need to set up the beacon manufacturer that has me walking past the green chip buffer, although I'm not even emptying it yet because I'm not making blue circuits, which are the big green circuit eater. I only have 2 lanes of the mixed build at this point. Yeah, so all of those buffers are still on eat the surplus, other than I turned the plastic one around and now it's backed up, so sure, plastic doesn't seem to be a thing I end up bottlenecked on this run, which I'm happy with. And then then all of this mess of like trying to thread the acid around both the coils and the power grid. So the steam that the steam engine uses counts as a fluid and would have connected to the pipe there that I'm trying to put the sulfuric acid through. So yeah, mildly annoying things. And I still haven't built all of the steam engines, and I think some of them are missing the burner inserters too, so that's a good time. Let's see if we can just make some of those manually. So yeah, so I've got, I don't know if I talked about the same kind of thing with this mixed build. I don't know if we'll see it again either, because I was talking about other stuff at the time. So at the bottom of this, so there are 4 lanes, or there will be 4 lanes of this mixed build if I can get this thing working. Yeah, there are 4 lanes at the bottom. I'm getting a bit less than 2 belts worth of green chips out of the buffer. When I turn the buffer around, I'll get a full lane from the buffer, but I'm only ever putting in like a bit less than a lane from the green, from what I'm manufacturing, because they are now at, like, I've taken the tier 3 assemblers to build these blue chips because I can module them harder, which means I've now got less than, I'm making like 80% of a lane of green chips, and it turns out that I specifically want to evenly divide those between these 4 lanes for kind of unusual reasons. Like, most of the time, especially with mixed builds, like, yeah, let's talk about failure modes. If I don't have enough red chips for whatever reason, typically that's if plastic is low, or maybe if the copper buffers have been bad. I think I had one where I forgot to swap the furnaces before going out on the push and then ran out of copper. I'm like, okay, that was dumb. If I don't have enough red circuits, then the modules take all the red circuits. There aren't any left of the blue circuits. The thing dies. I end up with a pile of speed modules. I don't have the blue circuits to turn them into the rocket control units, and I need to like go around and fudge things and turn off speed module assemblers and stuff like that. It's a bit of a pain in the ass. So it's pretty important most of the time to fill up all of to fill up one lane of mixed build before worrying about the other lanes, because you would rather get at least most of your stuff well ratioed rather than getting like a larger scale of stuff but at a bad ratio, because that still means you can't use it. I mean, the ideal situation is that everything runs at the rate you want. Is this? Yeah, this is, so let's talk about that output priority now. That's kind of important. Let's talk about these prod mods first. So this is like, building all these prod mods and speed mods is a thing I'm kind of doing anyway these days, which is not necessarily the best thing to do as opposed to just building more assemblers. But the reason I'm doing that is because this new mixed build plan, caching all the green chips, ended up being significantly faster than the old, more normal build that cached iron and copper and then made all the green chips at the beginning of the mixed build. And so, because the rest of the run got faster, the previous arrangement of like this is roughly how many low density structure and rocket fuels assemblers I need to get, you know, all that stuff done in time to line up with the rocket control units at the end, those ended up slower. And at that point I had, not fast enough to keep up with the rest of the base being improved. So I had two options. The first was redesign all of the petrochemical stuff, figure out what rate of stuff I wanted to be able to make specifically the light oil at the increased rate I needed to be able to meet the timings and milestones of the new build. And I didn't do that. Instead, I'm just speed modulating and prod modding these things to get stuff out a bit faster and to get a bit of free stuff. And that's because this mix build is faster, so the other stuff needs to be faster. The reason for the splitter priority, which is kind of important and ends up being like a major thing, is the base actually produces less than half the solid fuel it needs to even keep, no, not less than half. It doesn't produce fully twice the amount of solid fuel it needs to keep the rocket fuel assemblers going at full speed. So when I had the splitter without the priority, and half of it was going into the buffer for the power plant, and half of it was going into the rocket fuel build, the half that was going to the rocket fuel build was not enough. So there were a bunch of rocket fuel assemblers there just not doing anything for the duration of like when they should be doing stuff. And I think there's only, like, they're carefully ratioed so that, low density structure takes nominally 20 seconds per cycle, and rocket fuel takes 30 seconds per cycle. So I have 8 low density structure assemblers and 12 rocket fuel assemblers, and those will produce the same amount of stuff in the same amount of time, except that a couple of the rocket fuel ones just didn't have solid fuel, and so haven't been doing anything the whole time. And so I might end up low on rocket fuel, and even giving them more rocket fuel now won't help because it's the manufacturing time that I missed out on. Other things I'm not happy about with this run are having to move my wall of gun turrets because the mixed build ended up in the wrong place, but sure. So that splitter ages ago that I pointed out with the solid fuel, between the solid fuel buffer, ends up being super important. I have to push the majority of solid fuel I'm making into the rocket fuel, because otherwise it doesn't have enough. The bit that's left over needs to go into the buffer and specifically not be used for power, because if I start using that for power too soon, I use it instead of coal. I want to be leaning on the coal, so I'm buffering the solid fuel that's left over from rocket fuel. And so when I have this giant thing with all of the modules and all of the red chips, and this is other thing I'm realizing I'm not happy about is because I've forgotten one of the other things as well. First of all, reverse the buffer. Disadvantages of having to do that yourself. Decide you want the buffer faster, so put better inserters in. That's fine. I'm being attacked. That's a thing. So Factorio players who are good at doing ratios in their head, and specifically complex ratios, because there's a mix of different assembler types and also modules, and I think I'm about to beacon this stuff as well. Do I even connect the... Usually I want to disconnect that green chips line from the mall as well, or at least take away the inserters going into the beacons, although I think I thought about it later and realized it doesn't matter, because the deal is I'm getting less than 2 belts of green chips out of that splitter, and I mentioned a while ago but didn't talk about why, so we can do that now. Those splitters for the green chips specifically divide things evenly between these 4 lanes, and the reason for that is each of these 4 lanes uses more than half a belt of green chips, so I need to do this buffer trick where I manually refill this stuff on each lane anyway. And if I did so the green chips I put in at the beginning only really have to get as far as that top-up box, and they will, because the main uses are the tier 3 assemblers making blue chips and the refill boxes before it hits those, so that's fine. But if I prioritize the green chips to the nearest, like if I prioritize the green chips in order of like the way the belts, prioritize it into the first lane of the mix build first, then the last lane just doesn't get enough, because I don't have full 4 half belts. I have a bit less than that, and so I would rather spread those out evenly and then lean on the top-up boxes to make sure that the things that need a lot of green chips have access to a lot of green chips. I think I had other builds where I had boxes directly feeding one of the assemblers that made blue chips with just like, here's a box of green chips just for you. I think this way works better because it distributes them better, and yeah, being slightly annoyed about where I decided to put the coils build and just tacking that thing on the end. Yeah, and so all this stuff went in boxes. There was a bit of a cache there, it was fine. Now we've also connected the rocket control unit feed to this, we can take it over to the silo and start caching these things in a sensible way, and as long as we didn't run out of cache previously. Oh yeah, this is the bit where I realize it's day 13. I have damage 9, that's kind of not enough for this part in the game. Like, Wave Defense is going to start throwing at me more serious things. Yeah, there's a fun failure mode here where I'm putting all these inserters in, where if I accidentally power the rocket silo, it'll start making rocket components, but it doesn't have the production module 3s yet, which means it's not using the components as efficiently, and then yeah, the whole thing falls apart because the number and quality of production modules that I put in the rocket silo gives me like an extra 40% worth of productivity of the rocket silo. So now all the inserters are powered, so things will cache separately because I've got the splitters filtering, but the rocket silo is not powered, so even though the inserters are putting the things in the rocket silo, it's fine. I'm not using those things suboptimally. But also, day 9, day 13, weapon damage 9 is not enough, and these things are struggling, and I probably need to do something about this. But I'm happy spending time on this now because all the things are manufacturing. Like I've got the rocket fuel priority done now. I've got the RCUs online, and also mostly I just care about them not getting in. So extra layer of wall will help with that a bit, and the robot's running around automatically repairing things. So yeah. Yeah, this is like another way that the base will just like die or just be massively ineffective after the first rocket, is that it leans so heavily on the caches that it unloads all the caches into the first rocket, and then there's no capacity left in the base. And yeah, these nests are like kind of really close, and I probably should have pushed these earlier, and it's part of the reason why they're giving me so much trouble now. And yeah, and I'm still working on the weapon damage. It's the most important thing to get past the armor, and it's also the thing that scales best with the guns at the moment. Like, one of the things that I'm still not sure about the wave defense scenario is, like, because the less fighting you do, the more time you can spend building your base and building the rocket. And the earlier you stop fighting, like I mentioned, the size of rocket fuel and low density structure build I have takes 40 minutes to get all this stuff together. The RCU build is much faster because it's designed to catch up, but that gives me a 40-minute timer. And so, like, one of the open questions that I probably have to experiment with it more if I want to get this faster. So yeah, that's all, that's pretty happy. Full lanes of red and green chips, yeah. So one of the things, yeah, and it's also why the thing I mentioned about, this is the next of the points where I was like, is this run even continuing? The reason why all those belts are full is because the machines aren't using them, because they don't have enough power. So never mind doing all that fighting. It's kind of important. And in fact, yeah, this is where I realized that that's not the way to get to the solid fuel buffer, and I think I just completely forgot to unload the solid fuel buffer into the power plant, even though I had all the beacons going. So those things at this point pretty important, and I think even grab some of that stuff manually and just run through the power plant and fuel all the boilers, because the base is struggling, and this will at least get it some power now and do its thing, and then the belts will catch up. So power is a bit happier, but things are getting used again. Upgrade the productivity modules in the rocket control units. Rocket control units are expensive. I want as good a deal on them as I can get. Open question about how much pushing should be done and whether or not I'm still over pushing. Because if I fight less in that beginning opening phase, that means I can get oil online sooner, which means that whole 40-minute timer that it takes the low density structure and the rocket fuel to fully manufacture can start earlier, which might mean the whole thing is faster. But also the time I spend fighting gets me the upgrades that I need to stay alive, and also pushes the nests back, which seems to be related to not being attacked as much. Still not entirely sure how Wave Defense decides how many enemies and when, other than at night, and it gets worse. And it seems to be fairly fixed, although not completely. Day 19 is definitely when I'm expecting behemoth biters to turn up, but sometimes they'll turn up on 17 or 18, but not much. Because the risk of over pushing is you don't get the systems online that you need earlier. You spend more time than you need to doing things that don't necessarily make a rocket go up, and you end up slower. The dangers of under pushing are your base gets eaten and you die, and the slightly less serious case is you have to stop whatever you're doing and run off and address a serious situation of you getting breached, which is when you're building a thing, you want to be building a thing. You don't have to worry about stopping what you're doing and having half a thing working and then having a chunk of your base not building the rocket, not doing the work it needs to get you the rocket components while you're away dealing with the combat emergency that you just had. Maybe that's a thing to try in a bit, attempt to push less and see how far I can push that line, because also I kinda don't care if all the turrets die as long as the rocket goes up. This is not even me really caring about whether or not this wall is. This is just let's just make it more difficult for the biters to get in. Okay, so these are enough biters that I actually have to do something about it, so I throw down some turrets, that's fine. And also because these guys were destroyed and out of ammo, I might leave some more turrets around here. But one of the differences between Wave Defense and other kinds of Factorio, mostly about speedruns and Rocket Rush, is the biters will prioritize military targets, which includes turrets and radars, but not walls, or else anything that blocks them and gets in their way. So what that means for Rocket Rush, what that means for Wave Defense, where you have this ring of turrets all around you, is you won't immediately get a situation where an overwhelming wave of biters arrives at your base, chews through the turrets in one place and proceeds onto the silo. They'll get kind of drawn to the other targets that are the gun turrets and kind of spread out around the base even if the gun turrets don't have any ammo in them. Which in one way is a good thing right at the end of the game, because it means you don't need to be worried about being interrupted by biters arriving and chewing on your silo quickly. The downside in the early / mid game is that you won't get one overwhelming wave of biters tearing through your defenses and hitting through. It'll almost always look like your base has successfully defended itself, because the biters will arrive. Even if they overwhelm one spot, they'll work their way around your defenses, engaging like one or maybe two turrets at a time, because they can come from the side instead of like the front where your wall is. And yeah, again, that's kind of the same conversation about StarCraft and concaves and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, this is me realizing that I took too many green chips out of the buffer, and now everything is slowing down and not working properly. Yeah, so I'm not getting enough green chips through there. So not enough green chips are getting through the red chips, which means like the blue circuits are fine because they've got the top-up buffer. The speed modules are not okay. And so I have a surplus of blue circuits at the end of the RCU build, which really I would rather have more speed modules and be turning those in. But, you know, numbers are kind of okay. The rocket fuel is a little behind the LDS, which is the thing I'm concerned with. But yeah, plastic buffer's fine. The fuel buffer's okay for the power plant. But yes, I was talking about turrets and concaves and waves. So a biter wave will kind of work its way around the turrets of your base, and each time they engage a new turret, that turret will do a bit of combat, and eventually you'll either lose a lot of turrets or your base will look like it will have held. But what will have actually happened is the biters will have worked their way all around the base and taken out like most of the turrets off one side, and then what happens the next night is the next wave of biters turn up, find themselves no turrets, no military targets, probably have eaten through the walls because, you know, the earlier wave needed to eat through the walls to get to the turrets, at which point you have pretty much a full wave of biters arriving like inside your base, inside your silo, and like no defenses on a wall at all. And that's an interesting thing that you need to worry about. So yeah, me pulling the trigger on this bit, deciding that I usually have enough speed modules on so I can get rid of that beacon. In this case, like in retrospect, I should have left the beacon on the speed modules and taken the beacon from the blue circuits, because I've already got enough blue circuits. Like, I'm fine with the number of blue circuits that I've got just sitting around at the end of those things. What I really need is speed modules. I don't even know if I have some in my inventory that I can share, but those guys are done. We're approaching. This running on belts thing is actually not necessarily for the moment either, because the rocket isn't even manufacturing yet. None of those will be the last rocket control unit that I care about. Get the modules, put them in the thing, give it some power. Bots are building the beacons with the speed modules. They're taking their sweet time about it though. I still don't have enough speed modules. And yeah, this is the point where I'm mostly pretty happy. The power grid is okay. I'm a bit concerned about the rocket fuel. Yeah, and so realizing the rocket fuel is going to be a problem, so I turned off the bots there, because had the bots still been doing their thing, as soon as I had the speed modules in my inventory, they would have put them in the next silo, and that would have been a pain in the ass. And I specifically wanted to move that beacon to the rocket fuel because I'm struggling for rocket fuel. Yeah, and this was one of the other things that I was just not happy about, like missing that prioritization on the splitter before the solid fuel buffer right at the beginning, and that meant that I had a decent chunk of rocket fuel just not producing at the rate it should have been because I was buffering the solid fuel instead of making rocket fuel out of it for quite a while, and then ended up quite short. And I guess in a lot of other situations this would look like a kind of successful thing, and it still was like the fastest I'd done yet. I think that's just a sign of me being faster, that I'm now, like, I should be done by now. Like, I've got enough LDS, I've got the rocket control units done. If the rocket fuel was working at the same rate as the LDS, which it was designed to, it just didn't have the inputs, then I would be done at this point. And you know, what is the time? We're looking at about, this would be very close to sub 90 minutes, which I would be pretty happy with. So yeah, here's me swapping some of the productivity modules out of the rocket fuel assemblers just so that I can put the speed modules, swapping in productivity modules so I can put the speed modules in beacons so they affect more things. Because my problem is I just straight up have not manufactured enough rocket fuel. And at this point in a run, with all the rocket control units I need, like, ideally I'll be happy if the rocket fuel and the low density structure and the RCUs, I've got like exactly the 180 per box that I need at the right time, you know, minus the ones that inserters have already put in the silo. Whereas sometimes and this happened quite a lot earlier before I was faster with the new mix build, it was pretty common that I would get enough low density structure and rocket fuel and then be able to turn those builds off and then be waiting for the RCUs to finish it. Like, the way it's set up at the moment, and I think this is just an improvement, is that even enough? That's not even enough. I need one more rocket fuel. Where's one rocket fuel? I think I ran past a couple of them. Oh well. At the moment I'm getting all the rocket control units done before the low density structure and rocket fuel is ready. I've got like, and then because I'm making control units at an increased rate because they were catching up, I've got like a bigger surplus of those. So that's why I've taken to putting an extra speed module and productivity module in the stuff early in the game. That's fine. The rocket's about to go up. That little bit of breach doesn't matter. So this rocket still ended up going up. Had a bit of a disaster with several things. But you know, an hour and 32 minutes is also still better than I did previously. So I think that's a good sign. This is me getting faster at things, and I think if I can do this with fewer mistakes, it's probably pretty reasonable to get at under 90 minutes. So yeah, we'll see.